This is Vince Lara in the Office of Communications at the College of Applied Health Sciences at the University of Illinois. Today I'll speak with Dr. Travis Gayles, who got his PhD and MD from Illinois and is now County Health Officer and Chief of Public Health Services of Montgomery County in Maryland. I wanted to ask you about Illinois, and you got your master's and PhD here. What made you pick Illinois? Because and why community health? Because you studied public policy and you studied African American studies at Duke. So why Illinois and why that particular field?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to chat with you. I love talking about these things and love talking about happy things in my time here at Illinois. To be perfectly honest, the relationship started out as complete happenstance. I had applied to all of the medical schools. I thought I was going to do an MD and an MPH component, and had started getting some secondaries and going through that process. And being from the East Coast, I grew up in Virginia, went to school at Duke in North Carolina, and was living in Washington, D.C. I didn't know much at all about the Midwest outside of Chicago was there, and didn't have any connections or attachments to the area. But I received a flyer in the mail from the University of Illinois Medical Scholars Program. And unlike most traditional MD, PhD programs, most other programs, the PhD had to be in a biomedical science. And what intrigued me about Illinois was pretty much you could get a PhD in any of the graduate programs. And so the minute I saw the flyer, I said, well, let me do some background research and Google and find out what's there. And I discovered that there was a community health program with an emphasis in health policy. And so how those two things came together is, as you mentioned, my undergrad degrees are in public policy studies and African American studies. And within public policy studies, I focused on health policy. And to add more detail to it, there was a little bit of time also. I graduated in 2001, and I had done all of my pre-med requirements, but I really liked this health policy piece and the public policy piece, and I couldn't figure out what would be the perfect marriage or the direction to go in. And so I said, well, you know what? There's no rush. Let me take some time to think about if I didn't go into medicine, what would I do? And so I spent a year with the Institute of Medicine doing research on a study that looked at improving palliative and end-of-life care for children and their families. And during that time, I got to see the power of research, understand how research played a role in advocacy and policy on different levels. But what was most exciting about the experience was the committee was made up of healthcare professionals, mostly physicians, who were doing what I thought I wanted to do. They were taking clinical practice to inform how to do research, and then using that to advocate for this particular issue and come up with a study and a bunch of recommendations that could then be used by policymakers and policyholders to advance policy. And so after spending time with them, I'm like, you're doing exactly what I want to do. And that helped crystallize to say, okay, medicine is the route I want to take, with a component of public policy and public health within that. And again, when I got the flyer, I ended up calling and saying, hey, I know it's late in the process, can I submit? They said, yes, submit your information. And it's funny that the things that you remember, it was the day after Christmas, and I had gone to Best Buy, and my Christmas gift to myself was a flat screen TV. And I'm on the roof of the garage at the Best Buy attempting to put the TV into my car when I get the call from the Med Scholars office here inviting me to come out for an interview. And the rest is history.
That's great. That's great. Your research focus has been healthcare disparities, as you talked about, and what really struck me too was bullying in pediatric populations. And I'm wondering what the inspiration was to look at those as a focus.
Well, part of it was a personal experience being bullied as a kid, and that resonating and sticking with me, throughout. And one of the things that I was interested in at the time and continue to be interested in is looking at how adverse exposures can cause changes in your body, in addition to the psychological stress that happens. But what happens when you're chronically exposed to, whether it's bullying or interpersonal violence or community violence? What types of changes does that cause in your body that may predispose you to having negative health outcomes as you age? As I said, in addition to the psychological stuff, what are those physiologic changes? And so that was the impetus behind that. And particularly at the time, I was in Chicago. And unfortunately, Chicago has a little bit of an issue with violence in some neighborhoods. And tying that to my desire to be in pediatrics is I have a fundamental problem with us as a community not understanding what children bring to the table. We hold them accountable for their school achievement. We hold them accountable with how they behave and all those kinds of things, but we don't always fully understand and respect all of the things that they are exposed to and encounter in their efforts to meet the goals and expectations we set for them. And so going into pediatrics and looking at those particular areas, I saw it as my opportunity to try to even the playing ground a little bit, so that when children do come to school or are participating in activities, sports, achievement, those kinds of things, that they don't have to worry about the health piece, that they can focus on the activity at hand and achieve and excel.
At Illinois, I was wondering who your biggest influences were, people that you maybe called a mentor or somebody that helped guide your research while you were here.
Sure. I would have to say the biggest one is Dr. Reginald Alston. Going back to the story I mentioned, getting the call to come interview, and when I finally made it out here, I think it was early February, it was snowing, and I had a conversation with Dr. Alston, and we just hit it off. Our research interest, just the personal chemistry, and it just so happened that the person I was meeting next was running late, so we got to talk for over an hour, and it just fit. And so when I went back home, obviously I had to be accepted here. That was the big component, but I was sold in terms of the opportunity to come out and be able to focus on projects, but then to also work with someone like Dr. Alston. And it worked out. He ended up being my major advisor here. And was just a great influence in terms of how to navigate the system as a young professional, a young academic, but without the ego. We only actually had one, I think the only time he ever actually yelled at me, and it wasn't really a yell, but it was over the concept of academic property. He had given me an opportunity to write a book chapter with him, and I had done the lion's share of the work and put together a draft, and he's like, no, it's a great draft and everything looks good with some minor edits, and he's like, but I have one problem. You never asked to be the author. This is your information. And I said, well, I just assume that, when you're working with a professor that they take over, and he's like, absolutely not. It's not about ego. He's like, my job as your mentor and advisor is to push you forward and push you out even further than where I am today, in order to be successful. And so, at every step of the way, it was about, learning more and getting new opportunities to learn and be ultimately successful, 10, 20 years down the line, and be able to provide that same mentorship back to others in the future.
So part of the reason why you made the trip here to Champaign-Urbana is you'll be the keynote speaker at the MSP Retreat, which is August 17th. It's tomorrow. I'm wondering what are going to be some of the key points of emphasis of your speech, if you don't mind sharing them.
Sure. Well, this will be posted after the event.
Correct.
So there will be no
so you won't have to worry, yes.
Well, the title of it is actually A Road Less Traveled, and exploring the intersection between my career in policy and public health as well as in medicine. And I think I chose the road analogy because it's a good way. Roads imply connection. You've got, between different destinations. It implies that there's a journey that goes with it. And even though we focus a lot of times on the ultimate destination, a road always has to have a starting point along the way. And the other piece of it is most roads aren't exactly linear. there's a curve or a bridge or there's something there that makes it not an entirely perfect route. And so the notion is to talk about my journey and the path that I took, kind of some of what we've discussed today, but then also look at emerging public health topics and actually show how, I think going back to when I was an undergrad and majoring in public policy and having people be like, so what are you going to do with the health policy background? This was pre-9/11 and no one really talked about public health outside of you do food inspections and keep restaurants open and if there's an outbreak, but we didn't have many at that time. And obviously we know since then it's changed. But looking at how a lot of the tools that I learned then and tools that I learned here in Illinois play out in what I do today. And so again, back 20 years ago when I started in the process, I couldn't have predicted what I'm doing today. But when I sit in my office and do the work that I do and look at my trajectory to where I am, it makes perfect sense. And so tying together at each kind of sentinel point through my career, how that work applies to what I do today. Because I think the other component is it's so easy to not see, when you're in the trenches learning and doing all the, your dissertation, all that kind of stuff, you're like, what does this have to do with what I'm doing in the future? Will this actually apply to what I'm doing? And I think it's helpful sometimes to get some perspective to say, even if it's not the direct, for example, I'm not doing research on bullying now. However, the tools that I learned through that process apply to, there are disparate outcomes in that. There is a community component to that in terms of advocacy, and what we do in terms of running a health department is a large part about community engagement around health issues. So hopefully being able to show the students who are in the program now how important it is to not focus so much on the exact package in the future, but think about, again, along that journey and that road, pick up the tools you'll need to be successful in the future.
Now, since you've completed your doctoral studies here, you've been a supporter of AHS. I talked to Reggie about it, and he said that's one of the things that, he felt like you were a person to talk to. Tell me why you've donated to AHS, why that's important to you, and what you're trying to convey by doing that.
Sure. Well, I have had the benefit both of great mentors along the way, as well as financial support when I was a graduate student here. Being honored to be selected for some of the awards that have been there, and had a lot of cheerleaders along the way. And I think it's important to show thanks for that, and particularly when you have the opportunity to be able to give back, to be able to pay it forward, whether that's your financial contribution, your service time, or coming back to give a talk, and I think it's important to keep those connections. And certainly, if you have had the opportunity to meet someone who has been extremely influential on your career and your trajectory, I think it's important to also be able to show thanks for that. And I know, in particular, Dr. Austin would say, no, I don't want any accolade and so forth. But he didn't have any choice in the matter. But I think it's important to stay connected to your roots and give back. And again, there's many different forms of giving back, but to give back to those who helped push you forward to the space where you are today.
Just one light question I wanted to ask you. So there had to be a couple of places while you were here in Chambana, as we call it, that had a big impact on you. Can you talk about a couple on or off campus that you really remember fondly?
Well, I'm a tennis player, so I played lots of tennis, and the tennis team's very good here. So I had the opportunity to spend time playing and watching. Also happened to be a big college basketball fan, and during my early tenure here was when the team went to the finals. And had some pretty good seasons during that time. It's been interesting seeing the downtown. I haven't been back since probably maybe 10 years. But it's been interesting to see how the trajectory of the town has changed a little bit, and it's been developed. I think the place that I probably spent the most time here was in the law library. That's where I studied.
Okay.
And so walking over here, I walked by it and had lots of fond memories there. So I think those are probably the places where I spent the most time, and activities I spent the most time doing, in terms of trying to achieve balance and be successful.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gayles, for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
My thanks to Dr. Travis Gayles. This has been A Few Minutes With.